Hello and welcome to the next chapter of the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Following his chess exploits over the summer, Lasker said that upon his return to Berlin, he planned on continuing his studies. The extent of that is outside the scope of this series, but what we do know is that his chess did continue into the latter half of 1889. Now, Lasker said previously that he had sometimes had trouble getting to play games with the stronger masters, who kept him at a distance. However, upon his return from these successful tournaments, he found much more success with these masters, and this all culminated, for now, in the match that we are about to take a look at right now. You see, some of the patrons of the Café Kaiserhof, one of Lasker's early stomping grounds, put together a prize fund in order to set up a match between our subject, Emanuel Lasker, and one of the original Hauptturnier winners, Curt von Bardeleben. Now, Bardeleben's master title was earned at the first ever Hauptturnier to do so, held at the 1881 Berlin Congress. You can see a similar format here with a first and final group. Bardeleben's initial group is actually quite interesting, as it has Emanuel's older brother Bertold Lasker, as well as 19-year-old Siebert Tarrasch, both of whom were unable to stop Bardeleben. And then, as you can see, he went on to win his final group and was therefore a master. His successes carried forward as he won the 1883 London tournament, the minor tournament, I should say. The major tournament was the one famously won by 3 points by Johann Zukertort. But this was a very successful campaign for Bardeleben in itself. And then at the 1883 Nuremberg Congress, held only 1 month later, he came in 5th. Again, very successful outing. That was the last time that we saw Bardeleben for 4 years. He practiced law, and it was at this point that he was finishing up his studies. So he would take a break for a while, and he would come back and only play very sparingly. His next tournament appearance would be at the 1887 Frankfurt tournament of the German Chess Federation, where he would finish 4th. Again, very successful. He was allowed to take part in the 1888 British Chess Association tournament in Bradford, where a shared 3rd is very respectable indeed. Another victory came later in 1888 at a smaller tournament in Leipzig, shared 1st with Mr. Fritz Riemann. They drew the playoff, so they overall split 1st prize. And finally, at the Breslau tournament that finished earlier this year, he was another one of the gentlemen, along with Bauer and Günzburg, who finished in shared 4th on 10 points overall. So I would say his resume certainly speaks for itself. He is yet another very accomplished international master, and he is more than capable of providing a challenge for the young Emanuel Lasker. Now, the conditions of this match are no different than most of any other tournament. The time control 20 moves an hour, as you can see below the camera. 1st to 4 wins is the overall winner of the match, and we're going to take a look at all of the games, starting right now. Curt von Bardeleben, with the opening move, opts for d4. Lasker responds d5, c4, e6, knight to c3, knight to f6, bishop to g5, bishop to e7, and e3. Here, Lasker opts for a slightly rarer move in b6, certainly much less common than at castles and knight b to d7, but definitely not unheard of. Bardeleben continues with knight to f3, and now we reach a game that he's played before. At the 1887 German Chess Federation Congress, von Bardeleben faced the immediate bishop to b7. This was played by the winner of the 1885 Hauptturnier, Max Harmonist. Play continued normally, bishop to d3, knight b to d7, and castles. Now, if Harmonist here had traded on c4 and castled, we would actually transpose to what we get in the game. But he decided to go for the immediate c5. This provoked a lot of exchanges: bishop f6, cd5, ed5, dc5, bishop c3, bc3, and bc5. And von Bardeleben would actually go on to win this game, as after rook to e1, Harmonist mistakenly castled, which just dropped a pawn to queen to b1. The bishop is attacked, the pawn on h7 is attacked, and von Bardeleben would go on to carry this extra pawn to the endgame. Lasker decided to delay that. He instead castled here. And after bishop to d3, he now exchanges on c4. dc4, bishop c4, and only here, bishop b7. Castles and knight b to d7. And here, von Bardeleben plays the best move in the position, queen to e2. Now, up until this point, the players were following a game between Johann Zukertort and James Mason from the 1886 British Chess Association Congress. In this one, Mr. Mason played the move knight to e4, and this again provoked exchanges: knight e4, bishop e4, bishop e7, queen e7. The knight dropped back to d2, which sent the bishop all the way back to b7. Rook a to c1, and now a6 was played. This game would be drawn very shortly. Lasker opts for a very interesting move in a6. Now, this move isn't very substantial in itself. However, it is important because the year before, in 1888, von Bardeleben and Lasker played on a consultation team together against a rival Berlin club. Essentially, the teammates, along with their other teammates, would all discuss the moves together before playing them. This line was featured in one of their games. Now, von Bardeleben and Lasker played white in that game, and Bardeleben continues in the same fashion as in that consultation game with a4. Now, at the time, c5 was given as the correct move for black, and indeed, now is a very good time for black to hit the center. But Lasker continues in the same way as the opposing club, with knight to d5. Bishop captures on e7, queen captures on e7, and now e4. This is kind of the problem with knight to d5. It more or less concedes the center to white. After knight to f4 and queen to e3, the knight slid back to g6. Now, in that consultation game, the team decided to play the normal developing move rook f to e1. And after rook a to d8, rook a to c1. All fairly normal stuff. Now, the rival club decided to strike with c5 here. This is perhaps a little bit risky, as d5 is a very strong strike. Now, the follow-up to this was e5, but the players refuted this pretty directly through after knight to e2, king h8, knight to g3, knight f4, and finally knight to f5. This knight proved very helpful in the team ultimately winning this game. However, von Bardeleben deviates from that successful campaign with knight to e2. This move is a novelty, and so it's as of move 15 that the players are playing a unique game. Lasker continues with knight to f6 and knight to g3. We have rook f to d8 from Lasker, rook f to c1, and now queen to b4, poking the b2 pawn. b3 keeps it all defended, now rook a to c8, preparing c5. Bardeleben notices this and plays bishop to e2, which is useful prophylaxis against c5. The point is that you can still certainly consider it here. I don't think c5 is a bad move at all. After d captures on c5, rook captures on c5 is more or less forced. If you play something like d captures on c5, then you get a very free initiative here as white. Rook to c4, rook a to c1. This pawn's going to be under a whole lot of pressure for absolutely nothing. So rook captures on c5, and now you can trade here. Rook captures c5. Again, if you want to trade here, you can, but black's going to have free pressure on the isolated pawn. So you might as well try to trade queens here as black, and rook to c1, again, at the very end anyways. Perhaps white has some slight pull in this endgame. I don't think it's going to be too much, and a draw is a very reasonable outcome. But this would be a reasonable outcome for white, all things considered. Lasker did not go for the move c5, however. He instead played the much slower move, rook to d7. Now this still concedes the initiative to white. Rook to c4 comes all the same. The queen this time slides back to e7, and now rook a to c1. Okay, very strong attack here on the c-pawn, but it's nothing to be worried about for now, so Lasker simply stays calm with h6. Now this is a position where white is definitely more comfortable. Of course, this pressure on the c-file is going to be persistent pretty much for the entire game. And if you want to search for a real advantage here as white, you're probably going to end up having to slow roll it. You know, play your simple developing moves like h3, king h2, and just wait a while. Interestingly, there is one move that is very direct that actually does quite a bit of damage, and that's a5. This is very strong, though the point is rather subtle. After, let's say, rook c to d8, if black tries to get their own counterattack going, knight to e5 comes. Black is essentially forced to trade here. Knight captures e5, d captures e5, and there isn't really a good retreat square for the knights. Let's put it on h7, and now a5 comes very much in handy, as white simply wins a pawn. A captures b6, c captures b6, queen captures on b6. This is obviously not the cleanest pawn in the whole world, but white should still have some advantage here. However, that point is pretty subtle, and so I'm not too surprised that von Bardeleben decided to simply sit on the position with knight to d2, ensuring that his e-pawn is sufficiently protected. Okay, Lasker is more than happy. He slides his knight back to e8, and after bishop to h5, he continues on one of his normal knight remaneuvering ideas, knight to f8. Lasker never seems to have a problem with putting pieces on the back rank. That's certainly been an interesting characteristic of his play so far. Here comes a very committal move from von Bardeleben, e5. Definitely does a very good job of shutting out the knight on e8, controlling all of the nice squares it wants to go to, but he's so weak on the d-file, and rook c to d8 ensures that this weakness is going to be attacked right away. Here, von Bardeleben realizes that his bishop is doing absolutely nothing here, so he retreats it to f3. And now we reach a point where I think that black can equalize very easily if he simply thrusts forward here with c5. White is going to give up a pawn if they play any move other than knight to e2. And after c captures d4, rook captures d4, bishop captures f3, knight captures f3. I think knight to c7 followed by knight to d5 leaves black with a perfectly fine position. I don't think that they can complain in any capacity. Lasker instead decides to trade on f3 right away. And after bishop captures f3, knight captures on f3, he doesn't really have any way to remove this weakness on the c-file, so he instead returns his knight to g6. And here Curt von Bardeleben played the move queen to e4 and then offered a draw. Now, this position is slightly better for white than the previous one, since, as I said, black still hasn't dealt with this weakness on the c file. But I would say that it's still pretty double-edged, as the d file will always have to be taken care of. So Lasker decided to accept, and on move 27, the players split the point. I would like to imagine that von Bardeleben would probably play this on longer if it were later in the match, but since it's only game 1, an early draw is definitely not unheard of. This is actually a fairly common practice, even today, to some extent. So there we have it. The first game in the match between Lasker and von Bardeleben is perhaps not the most exciting one, but there are plenty more games to come, and there will be much more action, I assure you. So you have much more to look forward to with this match. I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.